Before credit cards, before banks, before paper bills, and long before anyone could send money with a phone, people still needed a way to exchange value. But here's the surprising part. Money did not begin with coins, and it certainly did not begin with dollars, euros, or pounds. Thousands of years ago, people used grain, livestock, shells, metal, and many other valuable objects to trade, store wealth, and pay what they owed. Then, civilizations began creating coins. Paper money appeared. Banks grew powerful. Gold became connected to national currencies. Governments eventually created money that was valuable because people trusted the system behind it. And today, money can move from one side of the world to another without a single physical banknote changing hands. Hello, my best students, and welcome back to Learn English with Clara. My name is Clara, and today we're going to travel through one of the most fascinating stories in human civilization, the history of money. This isn't only a story about coins and banknotes. It's a story about trust, trade, power, technology, empires, governments, and the constant human need to answer one simple question. How can we exchange value with people we may not know or trust? Think about the money you use today. You can receive your salary digitally, pay with a card, buy something online, send money to another country, or open your phone and see numbers representing the money you own. But why do those numbers have value? Why does a piece of paper allow you to buy food? Why did gold become so important? Who created the first coins? Why did people begin trusting paper money? And how did banks become such a powerful part of the global economy? To answer those questions, we need to go back thousands of years. We'll begin with the earliest systems of trade and discover why the popular story of simple barter doesn't explain the full history of money. Then, we'll explore the rise of coins and how governments began controlling currency. We'll discover how paper money developed and changed trade. We'll examine the rise of banks, credit, and financial systems. And finally, we'll see how gold-backed currencies gave way to modern fiat money, credit cards, electronic payments, and the digital financial world we live in today. And while we explore this incredible history, you'll also improve your English. You'll learn useful vocabulary related to trade, economics, banking, debt, wealth, and society. You'll strengthen your listening comprehension, and you'll practice understanding historical ideas in natural English. So stay with me until the end, because once you understand the history of money, you may never look at the money in your pocket or the numbers inside your bank account in exactly the same way again. Money has changed its form many times, from objects to metal to paper to numbers on screens. But behind every successful form of money, there has always been one essential ingredient: trust. So, how did that trust begin? Let's travel back thousands of years and find out. Chapter number 1. Before coins and banks, how did the first forms of money actually begin? Imagine waking up in a world without money. No coins, no banknotes, no credit cards, no bank accounts. You have food. Your neighbor has tools. Someone else owns animals. Another person produces cloth. People still need things from one another, but there is no universal currency to make exchange simple. So how do you trade? The popular answer is barter. You give someone wheat, and they give you a chicken. You repair someone's roof, and they give you vegetables. You exchange one product directly for another. Barter certainly existed, but the real history of money is more complicated. Early communities often depended on relationships, obligations, gifts, and credit. People lived in smaller groups where they knew one another. If your neighbor gave you food today, you might help them later. Nobody needed to calculate the exact value of every exchange immediately. Trust existed through relationships. You remembered who helped you, who owed something, who had contributed to the community. In other words, people could exchange value without using physical money. But as societies became larger, trade became more complicated. Imagine traveling to another village with 10 bags of grain. You want to buy a cow. You find someone selling one. But there's a problem. The owner doesn't want grain. They want tools. Now you must find someone who has tools and wants grain. Exchange your grain for tools, then return to the owner of the cow. And hopefully, the cow is still available. This problem is sometimes called the double coincidence of wants. For direct barter to work efficiently, you need to find someone who has what you want and wants what you have. That's difficult. So societies needed better systems for measuring and exchanging value. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, people used commodities such as barley and silver as units of value. Temples and palaces played important economic roles. Records of debts and payments could be written on clay tablets. Imagine that. Thousands of years before modern banks, people were already recording who owed what. This reveals something important. Money wasn't only created to buy things, it was also connected to debt, accounting, taxes, and the organization of society. Now let's talk about commodity money. Commodity money is something that has value as money, but also has practical value itself. Cattle are a good example. In some societies, livestock represented wealth. Animals could provide food, milk, labor, and they could reproduce. But imagine trying to buy a small object with a cow. You can't easily divide the animal into 10 equal pieces, use one piece, and keep the rest alive. So cattle had limitations as everyday money. Other societies used salt, grain, tea, cloth, beads, and shells. One famous example is cowrie shells. Cowrie shells were used as money in different parts of Africa, Asia, and other regions for long periods of history. Why shells? They were portable, relatively durable, easy to recognize, and difficult to produce locally in some regions. These characteristics made them useful for exchange. And this teaches us something about money. For something to work effectively as money, it needs certain qualities. It should be recognizable. People need to know what it is. It should be durable. If your money disappears or becomes useless after a few days, it isn't very practical. It should be portable. Imagine carrying 100 kilograms of grain every time you want to buy something. And ideally, it should be divisible. You need to be able to use different amounts for purchases of different sizes. But there's another quality that's even more important. People need to accept it. Think about that. You could find the most beautiful stone in the world, declare that it's worth $1,000, and try to buy a car with it. The seller would probably say no. Why? Because money depends on shared belief. If nobody accepts something as payment, it cannot function effectively as money. This idea has followed money throughout history. Shells had value because communities accepted them. Metal had value because people trusted its usefulness and scarcity. Coins had value because merchants and governments recognized them. Paper money had value because people trusted the institutions behind it. And digital money works because we trust financial systems to record and transfer value. The technology changes. Trust remains. Now let's return to the ancient world. As trade networks expanded, people needed more convenient ways to exchange value. Metals became increasingly useful. Copper, silver, gold. Why? Because metals had many of the qualities money needed. They were durable, portable, divisible, and valuable. But there was still a problem. Before standardized coins, people could use pieces of metal. Every transaction might require weighing the metal, checking its quality, determining whether it was pure. Imagine buying something today, and before paying, the seller takes your money, puts it on a scale, tests the material, and spends 10 minutes deciding whether to accept it. Trade was possible, but not always efficient. Then something revolutionary happened. Authorities began creating standardized pieces of metal, coins. A coin could have an official weight, an official design, and the authority of a government or ruler behind it. Instead of testing every piece of metal, people could recognize the coin, trust the stamp, and exchange it more easily. This made trade faster, but it also gave rulers something extremely powerful: control over money. Governments could create coins, collect taxes in those coins, pay soldiers, finance wars, support trade, and influence economic life. Money was becoming more than a tool for exchange. It was becoming a tool of political power. And this is one of the biggest patterns we'll see throughout history. Whenever the form of money changes, the distribution of power often changes with it. The first forms of money helped people solve practical problems: how to measure value, how to record debt, how to exchange goods, how to trade with people outside their immediate communities. But those solutions created new questions. Who decides what money is worth? Who controls its production? How can people know whether money is genuine? And what happens when rulers manipulate the currency for their own benefit? Those questions became increasingly important as coins spread through the ancient world, because once civilizations discovered that money could carry the symbol and authority of the state, coins became much more than pieces of metal. They became instruments of trade, symbols of power, tools of taxation, and one of the technologies that helped empires expand. Chapter number 2: The Rise of Coins. How money helped build kingdoms, armies, and empires. A small piece of metal changed human civilization. It could fit inside your hand, travel across long distances, pay a soldier, buy food, collect taxes, and carry the image of a ruler into places that ruler had never visited. The coin may seem like a simple invention today, but in the ancient world, it transformed trade, politics, and power. The earliest widely recognized coins appeared around the 7th century BCE in Lydia, a kingdom located in what is now Western Turkey. These early coins were made from electrum, a natural mixture of gold and silver. Before coins, people could exchange pieces of metal by weight, but every transaction required more effort. Was the metal pure? How much did it weigh? Could the other person trust it? Coins offered a solution. An authority could produce a standardized piece of metal, mark it with an official symbol, and guarantee its weight and value. Suddenly, people didn't need to test every piece of metal during every transaction. They could recognize the coin, trust the authority behind it, and continue trading. That made commerce faster. But something even more important was happening. Money was becoming closely connected to government power. Imagine you're the ruler of an ancient kingdom. You need soldiers, roads, government officials, defenses, public buildings. How do you pay for all of this? Coins give you a powerful system. You create official currency. You use it to pay soldiers and workers. Then you require people to pay taxes using those same coins. Now citizens need your currency. Farmers sell products to earn coins. Merchants accept coins in exchange for goods. Workers provide labor to receive payment. The government creates demand for the money because people need it to meet their obligations. This relationship between money and taxation became extremely important, and as kingdoms expanded, coins traveled with them. The ancient Greeks developed many different coins. Greek city-states often created their own currencies. Athens became famous for its silver tetradrachm. The coin carried the image of Athena on one side and an owl on the other. The owl became widely recognized, and because Athens was an important center of trade, its coins traveled across large regions. This teaches us another important lesson. A successful currency can spread beyond the territory that creates it. If merchants trust the money, if it maintains a reliable value, and if many people accept it, the currency becomes more useful. The more people use it, the more powerful it can become. We can still see this principle in the modern world. Some currencies are accepted and trusted far beyond the countries that issue them. But coins were not only economic tools, they were also a form of communication. Think about the world before television, before newspapers, before the internet. Most people would never meet their ruler. They might never travel to the capital. But they could hold a coin carrying the ruler's face. Coins showed kings, emperors, gods, religious symbols, military victories, important buildings, messages about power. Every time money changed hands, the symbols traveled. In this way, coins became one of the earliest forms of mass political communication. Now let's talk about the Roman Empire. Rome created one of the most influential monetary systems in the ancient world. Roman coins helped support trade across enormous distances. A merchant could travel through different parts of the empire and use recognized currency. Soldiers could receive payment. Governments could collect taxes. Businesses could calculate prices. Money helped connect a huge and diverse empire. But the Roman story also reveals one of the greatest dangers in the history of money: currency debasement. Imagine a silver coin. At first, the coin contains a high percentage of silver. But the government needs more money. Perhaps it needs to pay soldiers, finance wars, or manage rising expenses. So the government begins reducing the amount of silver inside each coin. It mixes the silver with cheaper metals. Now, the same amount of silver can be used to create more coins. At first, this seems useful. The government has more currency to spend. But over time, people notice. The coins contain less valuable metal. Trust begins to weaken. Prices can rise. People may prefer older coins with more silver. Economic problems grow. This process happened at different points in Roman history, and it teaches us a lesson that remains relevant today. Money depends on confidence. A government can declare that something is money, but if people stop trusting its value, serious problems can follow. Now, imagine you're a merchant. Someone offers you 2 coins. One is older and contains more silver. The other is newer and contains less. Which one would you prefer to keep? Probably the older one. You might spend the lower quality money and save the better money. This behavior reflects an idea later associated with what economists call Gresham's law. When 2 forms of money are officially treated as having the same value, people may spend the money they consider less valuable while keeping the money they consider more valuable. In simple words, people keep the good money and spend the bad money. Now, here's another important point. Coins made trade easier, but they also made taxation and warfare more organized. A government with an effective monetary system could collect resources more efficiently, pay professional armies, build infrastructure, expand territory, and control distant regions. Money helped rulers transform economic resources into political and military power. This is why the history of money cannot be separated from the history of empires. Strong monetary systems often supported strong states, And when monetary systems became unstable, the consequences could spread throughout society. But there was still a major limitation. Coins were heavy. Imagine being a wealthy merchant traveling across hundreds of kilometers. You're carrying large amounts of gold and silver. You need guards. You're vulnerable to thieves. Transporting wealth is expensive and dangerous. As international trade expanded, merchants needed better ways to move value. They needed systems that allowed money to travel without physically carrying enormous quantities of metal everywhere. This created opportunities for new financial tools. Merchants began using documents representing debts and payments. Financial networks became more sophisticated. Banking activities developed, and eventually, another revolutionary form of money appeared: paper. At first, the idea sounded almost ridiculous. Why would anyone exchange valuable goods, gold or silver, for a piece of paper? The answer was the same force that had supported money from the beginning: trust. If people trusted the person, merchant, bank, or government behind the paper, then the paper could represent value. And once societies discovered that value could be transferred through documents, the financial world changed again. Because money no longer needed to be valuable because of the material it was made from, its value could come from what it represented: a promise, a debt, a guarantee, a claim on something stored somewhere else, and eventually, the authority of the state itself. Coins helped kingdoms collect taxes, pay armies, expand trade, spread political messages, and build empires. But paper money would allow value to travel farther, faster, and in much larger amounts. And its development would force humanity to answer an even more difficult question: can a piece of paper become money simply because we agree to trust it? Chapter Numerator 3: The Birth of Paper Money. How a simple promise became more powerful than gold. Imagine you're a wealthy merchant. You need to travel hundreds of kilometers to buy goods. You have enough money, but there's a problem. Your wealth is stored in heavy coins: gold, silver, copper. Carrying large amounts of metal is uncomfortable, slow, and dangerous. Thieves know that merchants carry money. Roads aren't always safe, and the farther you travel, the greater the risk becomes. So you ask an important question: what if I could leave my valuable metal somewhere safe, receive a document proving that I own it, travel with that document, and exchange it for value somewhere else? That idea may sound simple today, but it represented a major transformation in the history of money. Because once people began accepting paper claims instead of physical metal, money became lighter, faster, and more flexible. Now, the story of paper money begins most importantly in China. Centuries before paper banknotes became common in Europe, Chinese merchants and governments were experimenting with ways to replace heavy metal coins. During the Tang Dynasty, trade expanded significantly. Merchants traveling long distances needed safer ways to move wealth. Instead of carrying enormous quantities of copper coins, some began leaving their money with trusted agents. In return, they received documents that represented the value they had deposited. These early financial documents were not exactly the same as modern banknotes, but they demonstrated something revolutionary. A piece of paper could represent money. Later, during the Song Dynasty, paper money developed much further. The Chinese economy was growing, cities were expanding, trade was increasing, and copper coins were becoming inconvenient for large transactions. Imagine buying an expensive product and needing to transport thousands of metal coins to complete the payment. Paper was much easier. Private merchants began issuing paper notes that could be exchanged for coins. Eventually, the government became involved. Authorities regulated the system, and later issued official paper currency. One famous form of early Chinese paper money was called jiaozi. Now, think about how strange this idea must have seemed. A gold coin has valuable metal inside it. A silver coin contains silver. But paper? The paper itself is almost worthless. You cannot eat it, build with it, turn it into a useful tool. So why would anyone accept it? Because the paper represented a promise that it could be exchanged for something valuable. And that promise depended on trust. If people trusted the issuer, the paper could circulate as money. But if that trust disappeared, the paper could quickly become worthless. This is one of the most important ideas in the entire history of money. Money doesn't need to have significant physical value. It needs people to believe that others will accept it. Imagine receiving a paper note worth $100 today. Why do you accept it? Not because the paper is valuable. You accept it because you believe someone else will accept it tomorrow. A store, a bank, another person, the government. Money works through a network of shared confidence. Now, here's where governments discovered both the power and the danger of paper money. Coins made from precious metals had a natural limitation. To create more gold coins, you needed more gold. To create more silver coins, you needed more silver. But paper money could be produced much more easily. A government could print additional notes. At first, this could help the economy. More money could support trade. Governments could finance projects, pay workers, respond to emergencies. But what happens when too much paper money is created? Imagine an economy with 1,000 products and 1,000 units of money. Now imagine the government dramatically increases the amount of money, but the number of products remains the same. More money is competing for the same goods. Prices may rise. The purchasing power of each unit of money may fall. This is one way inflation can occur. And early paper money systems experienced serious problems when governments issued too much currency. The lesson was clear. Paper money could be extremely useful, but only if people continued trusting its value. Now let's move west. For centuries, European economies continued depending heavily on metal coins. Gold and silver remained central to trade. But merchants faced the same problem. Transporting large quantities of metal was dangerous. As trade expanded, financial documents became more important. Merchants developed bills of exchange. Imagine you're a merchant in one city. You need to pay someone in another country. Instead of physically transporting gold, you use a document promising payment. A network of merchants and bankers can settle the transaction. This reduces the need to move physical money. It also makes international trade easier. Now here's something fascinating. A bill of exchange wasn't money exactly like a coin, but it could perform some of the functions of money. It represented value. It could transfer a financial claim. And in some cases, it could be transferred from one person to another. Slowly, financial systems were learning to move value through information. Think about that. The modern world sends money electronically. Numbers change inside computer systems, but the basic idea is much older. Instead of moving physical objects, we move claims, promises, records, information about who owns what. Now, banks became increasingly important. Imagine depositing 100 gold coins with a goldsmith or banker. They keep your gold safe. You receive a receipt. At first, you use the receipt only to prove that the gold belongs to you. But then, something changes. Instead of returning to the bank, collecting your gold, carrying it to another person, and having that person deposit it again, you simply give them the receipt. If everyone trusts the receipt, why move the gold? the paper itself begins circulating. And that's a powerful transformation. Money is becoming separated from the physical object. Now, here's where banking becomes even more interesting. Bankers notice something. Not everyone comes to collect their gold at the same time. Some depositors leave their money for months or years, so the bank doesn't need to keep every single coin sitting untouched. It can lend some of the money to other people. Borrowers use those funds to start businesses, buy property, finance trade. The bank earns interest. This helps expand economic activity, but it also creates risk. What happens if too many depositors suddenly want their money back? The bank may not have enough physical cash available. This is one reason trust is so important in banking. A bank can be financially healthy, but if everyone panics and demands their money at once, the system can face serious problems. This is called a bank run, and bank runs would become a recurring problem throughout financial history. Now let's return to paper money. In Europe, banknotes gradually became more important. Banks issued notes that represented claims on gold or silver. Instead of carrying metal, people carried paper. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, became an important part of this development. It issued banknotes, helped finance the government, and eventually became one of the world's most influential central banks. But notice what is happening. Money is changing again. First, people used commodities, then pieces of metal, then standardized coins. Now, paper notes representing claims on metal. Each transformation made money more efficient, but each transformation also required a new level of trust. With commodity money, you trusted the object. With coins, you trusted the metal and the authority that created the coin. With paper money, you trusted the institution promising to honor the note. And this raises an important question. What happens when the promise disappears? Imagine holding a banknote that says you can exchange it for gold. You trust the note because you believe the gold exists somewhere. But what if governments eventually decide that paper money no longer needs to be exchanged for gold at all? Would people continue using it? The answer, as we know today, is yes. But that transition took centuries. And before the world could reach modern money, another institution had to become incredibly powerful. Banks. Because once banks learned how to accept deposits, make loans, create credit, and expand the amount of money circulating through the economy, they became much more than places where people stored wealth. They became engines of economic growth, and sometimes engines of financial crisis. The history of paper money teaches us that money is becoming increasingly abstract. A cow has obvious practical value. A gold coin contains valuable metal. A paper banknote is a promise. And eventually, money would become numbers recorded inside bank accounts. But every step in this transformation depended on the same thing: trust. Trust that the paper would be accepted. Trust that the bank would return your money. Trust that governments wouldn't destroy the currency's value. And trust that the financial system would continue working tomorrow. Paper money made trade faster, safer, and more efficient. It helped businesses expand. Governments finance their activities, and financial networks connect distant economies. But it also opened the door to something even more powerful: credit. The ability to spend money today based on a promise to repay it tomorrow. And once societies learned how to create and expand credit, the global economy would never be the same again. Chapter number 4: The Rise of Banks and Credit. How debt became a powerful economic force. Imagine you have a great business idea. You know how to create a valuable product. Customers are interested. But there's one problem. You don't have enough money to begin. Without credit, your idea may never become reality. But with a loan, you can borrow money today, build your business, and repay the debt from future earnings. This simple idea became one of the most powerful forces in economic history. Banks made it possible to connect people who had extra money with people who needed money. Someone deposits savings. The bank keeps part of that money available and uses other funds to provide loans. Businesses borrow to expand. Families borrow to buy homes. Governments borrow to finance projects. And economic activity grows. But credit introduced something fascinating. Money was no longer only about what existed today. It became connected to expectations about the future. A bank gives you a loan because it believes you'll repay it later. A business borrows money because it expects future profits. An investor provides capital because they expect future growth. Credit allows people to use future income to create opportunities in the present. But debt can also become dangerous. Imagine borrowing money to build a successful business. The business grows. You repay the loan. The debt helped create value. Now imagine borrowing more than you can afford to buy things you don't need. Interest grows. Payments become difficult. You borrow again to repay previous debts. Now credit has become a trap. The same financial tool can create opportunity or financial destruction. Banks also became more powerful because lending could expand the money circulating in the economy. When banks make loans, new deposits can be created within the banking system. This means modern money isn't only created by governments printing banknotes. Commercial banks also play an important role in money creation through lending. But this system depends heavily on confidence. If banks make too many risky loans, borrowers fail to repay, or people lose trust and rush to withdraw their money, financial crises can happen. That's why governments eventually created stronger banking regulations, deposit protections, and central banks that could support financial stability. Over time, banks and credit helped finance factories, international trade, businesses, homes, infrastructure, and economic development. The modern world would be difficult to imagine without them. But credit also changed our relationship with money. People could spend before earning. Businesses could grow before making profits. Governments could finance enormous projects through borrowing. Money had become more than coins and paper. It had become a system of promises about the future. And the next transformation would take that idea even further. Because eventually, money would no longer need to be backed by gold at all. Chapter number 5. From Gold to Digital Money. How money became the numbers on your screen. Take out a banknote and look at it. What makes it valuable? The paper itself? No. The ink? The number printed on it? Not exactly. The real answer is trust. Today, most modern currencies are called fiat money. Fiat money isn't backed by a fixed amount of gold or silver. Its value depends on governments, central banks, laws, economic stability, and people's confidence that others will continue accepting it. But for a long time, many currencies were connected to gold. Under different forms of the gold standard, governments promised that currency could be exchanged for a certain amount of gold. This created confidence, but it also limited how freely governments could manage the money supply. Over time, wars, economic crises, and changing financial systems placed enormous pressure on the gold standard. During the 20th century, countries gradually moved away from it. One major turning point came in 1971, when the United States ended the convertibility of dollars into gold for foreign governments and central banks. Money entered a new era. The value of currencies depended increasingly on confidence in governments, central banks, and national economies. But another revolution was already beginning: technology. Banks started using computers to record transactions. Credit cards became more common. People could buy products without carrying cash. A TMS gave customers access to money outside normal banking hours. Then came the internet, online banking, electronic payments, mobile applications, contactless cards. Today, much of the money people use exists only as digital records. Your salary may arrive in your bank account without any physical cash moving. You pay for food with a card, send money through your phone, buy something online. Numbers change inside computer systems, and we accept those changes as real financial transactions. Money has become more abstract than ever. Thousands of years ago, people exchanged commodities, then metal, coins, paper, bank deposits, credit, and now, digital information. But one thing has remained surprisingly consistent: trust. You trust that your bank account balance is accurate. You trust that your card will work. You trust that businesses will accept your currency. You trust that the financial system will still function tomorrow. And that's perhaps the greatest lesson from the history of money. Money has never been only an object. It's a system, a shared agreement, a technology that helps human beings measure value, exchange goods, record debt, save for the future, and organize increasingly complex societies. The form of money will continue changing. Digital currencies may become more important. Cryptocurrencies may influence financial systems. New technologies may transform payments again. Nobody knows exactly what money will look like centuries from now. But history teaches us something important. Whenever money changes, society changes with it. Power moves, institutions adapt, new opportunities appear, new risks emerge, and people must decide what they're willing to trust. So the next time you hold a coin, use a banknote, tap your card, or look at the balance on your phone, remember the thousands of years of history behind that simple action. Money traveled from objects, to metal, to paper, to promises, and finally to numbers on screens. The form changed, the technology changed, but the foundation remained the same: trust. And as long as human beings continue exchanging value, the story of money will continue.